This is the
Five Stars
podcast.
Let me talk to you.
Hi.
So, what do you guys want to talk about? Tell me when I'm telling lies.
Thanks, guys. Back to you.
Well, hey. As crappy as the last couple weeks have been for me, waking up on Monday morning this week and seeing that email from YouTube saying, "Congrats on reaching 100 subscribers." I was like, God must be throwing me a bone. Yeah, I know you're having trouble breathing, and you wake up in the middle of the night with hot flashes. But hey, at least you reached the milestone of 100 subscribers after 4 years. Seriously though, I want to take a minute to thank everybody that comes back and listens to these shows every week. I don't do enough public service announcements on the channel, but it does mean a lot to have a small community of wrestling fans that like to listen to me ramble about classic wrestling every week. I'm not a flashy personality, and I never proclaimed to be one. I don't do all the pomp and circumcision with a high production value content and a lot of these crazy things I see podcasters doing in 2025. For me, it's always been about content. I just like coming on here and sharing my thoughts about classic wrestling. And while I know it's a small group of people that follow me, to me it's never been about money or a lifestyle. I just love pro wrestling. Still have a passion to talk about it. Not so much the current product. Although I still plan on keeping tabs with WWE's product throughout this year. So thank you. Anybody that subscribes to the channel and watches our shows every week, they're not always home runs, but I sure as boots try. I don't know where I heard that phrase before, but it was funny at the time. In any case, we are the Five Starr Wrestling Report, the wrestling podcast nobody knows but everybody needs. Today is Friday, so it's time for us to deep dive into some classic WCW and territory footage. I'm cautiously optimistic that I'll be able to get through this one without having a nasal conniption. Although I don't want to jinx anything. So let's get into the show and try to make it out of this one without a massive congestion attack. So we're a week removed from probably one of the greatest moments we've covered on the TBS Superstation in a very long time. Ricky the Dragon Steamboat has finally made his grand return back to the NWA after a 4-year absence. And while he's had a modicum of success in the WWF during his time there, he got the superstar treatment last week in more ways than one. And now Steamboat has one mission, one objective to reach now that he's back with the NWA. Not only is he back to revisit his storied history with Nature Boy Ric Flair, but he wants the NWA World's Heavyweight Championship. It's the boyhood dream story of the late 80s, except, well, this one isn't forced and artificially manufactured like the Shawn Michaels story of 1996 was. Plus, Ricky Steamboat is hands down a much more believable babyface than Shawn ever was. I don't care what anybody says. Fight me if you have a beef about it. When it comes to last week's program, because that big tag match with Steamboat and Gilbert versus Flair and Wyndham took precedence over everything else, I mean, the Steamboat return was really the only thing that mattered on the entire show. So it was good that they started with him this week at the interview podium and give him a chance to touch up on some of the things he talked about the other week. Again, reiterating his mission statement about wanting to become the NWA World Champion, setting out on a campaign to fight not just for the honor of himself, but for the honor of his wife Bonnie and his son Richie. And for those of you that know, the mere mention of Bonnie Steamboat, that is immediately going to send chills down your spine. Knowing what she turned out to be once she caught a little preview of the camera fame. Pretty soon there wasn't a camera in sight that Bonnie Steamboat didn't want to have her face plastered in front of. Try not to get hung up on her, though. I like the concept of this promo. Him bringing out his wife and son to elaborate on Ricky wanting to become champion in order to help support his family and carry along the family dynasty. Yeah, Richie's out there with the headband and the robe on, dressed exactly like Ricky was. And you know, man, it's sad that Richie's wrestling career never really took off. I don't even know how many people remember this because it was such a blimp on the radar in the Wrestling Chronicles. But yeah, WWE signed Richie to a contract back in, was it the late 2000s? 2009? Maybe 2010? It was back when it was still FCW, the primary WWE developmental training grounds in Florida. You know, Richie was down there around the same time as guys like Roman Reigns, when he was still Leaki, Seth Rollins, Jon Moxley, Big E, Bo Dallas. Kind of that crop of first-generation NXT guys. I think he may have wrestled a handful of dark matches for the main roster, but never officially got called up. Because remember, he had that really awful back injury right at the very end of his career. I think he wound up needing surgery for it. That was pretty much it for his wrestling career after that. By 2012, 2013, 2014, somewhere in that window, he was basically retired. It's an awful, tragic story. I mean, who knows how far Richie would have gone had things worked out differently. I think he could have been a huge babyface draw for the WWE during that mid-2010 era. Christ knows WWE needed top talent badly around that time. Especially babyfaces. Because that decade of the product was really fucking bad. You know what else was really fucking bad? This opening tag match in the program this week. Michael P.S. Hayes and the Junkyard Dog versus Bob Emery and Max MacGyver. Good Christ. I know Jimmy Garvin wasn't back yet. But who in their right mind thought that Michael Hayes and JYD as a tag team was a good idea? I totally get not wanting the Dog to work long squash matches by himself. I mean, Dog wasn't offering much of anything at this point in his career. But pairing him with Michael fucking Hayes, when you're instinctively making Michael Hayes the default workhorse of your tag team, you've got a big problem. This was sluggish. It was dull. It realistically only went maybe about 5 minutes. That was approximately 4 minutes too long. At the point Dog kept pulling the job guys off the ring mat to avoid pinning them, I was getting more and more irritable. There were several spots that Dog was attempting in this match where I was like, okay, what the hell was he trying to do? One looked like a Russian leg sweep where Dog inadvertently tripped over himself. Don't even know how that's humanly possible. Then a minute later, he tried to do the thing where he boxes the guy's ears while holding his head between his legs. But then the guy's head slipped out from underneath, so they both just fell to the mat in a heap. I think this was just sad more than anything. You know, we're talking about JYD on these Mid-South shows in 1984, right at the tail end of his juncture before he left for the WWF. He's already unmotivated and very out of shape on those shows. God, watching him here in 1989, it's like having a dying cat or a dying dog in the house that you know is going to kick the bucket anytime soon. You know it looks absolutely horrible, but you try to put on a happy face when it walks in the room and be like, yeah, there he is. He's looking great. Okay, yes, I legitimately stole that quote from Shane Gillis. Not even ashamed to admit it. So then we came back for a true iconic, only in WCW moment. Okay, so Butch Reed and J.J. Dillon are at the interview booth. We learned at the top of the show that J.J. acquired the services of Hacksaw Reed. So, yeah, remember the other week when I was speculating on the whole alliance between Reed and Dillon? Having a vague memory of those two working together at some point? Well, here you go. But that wasn't the LOL WCW moment. Okay, so they're in a wide shot. And while JR is about to interview Reed, you see another one of the camera guys just walk right into the fucking frame before they cut the feed to do the close-up on Reed. I'm just like, how amateur can you possibly get? These idiots could not figure out timing and positioning like that. That was cable access bad. And to be honest with you, I'm still not exactly sure what the hell was going on in this segment. Butch Reed goes to the ring for the match. JJ's with JR talking about some of the guys he's trained over the years, the kind of athletes that he's made stars out of. At no point does he actually explain why he's associated with Butch. All I know is that Butch is having a match with some unnamed job guy. Tony Schiavone basically comes out and reiterates what I just said, that nobody knows why J.J. Dillon is serving as Hacksaw's manager. And before we can even speculate on the possibilities, Reed pulls the job guy over with a headlock takeover, and he gets the pin. I believe for the very first and only time in wrestling history, a man was legitimately pinned via headlock takeover. And for all you marks that are going to say, no, MJF did it too, that was kayfabe. That also came after he had spent 15 minutes beating the fuck out of whoever his opponent was. This wasn't even that. This was Reed casually pulling a guy over by his head, accidentally pinning him, and then beating him up after the bell because he wasn't satisfied. Was that supposed to be the finish? Fuck if I know. I have no idea what this segment was supposed to accomplish. Then again, I have to assume it doesn't matter, because JJ's already got one foot out the door with the company anyway. If they ever had a plan for this duo, we will never know what the end goal was supposed to be. So after two relatively underwhelming studio squashes, what we really needed at this point was a hot and heavy picker-upper. And nothing describes hot and heavy like Kendall Windham versus George South. Now at this point, I have to assume the Texas Broncos are no longer a thing. If Dustin wasn't already gone by this point, it had to have been within a week or two of this taping block. You know, funny enough, this actually wasn't a bad match. I was expecting way worse than what we got. But credit to him. Kendall's shown a lot of improvement over the last couple years. He's put on some size. He's got some attitude now. Showing a little more personality on camera. Kind of an interesting thing they had going on with Kendall while he was working the match. Barry was out on the floor scouting him and I guess sort of cheering him on. And Kendall was definitely working more like a heel, which has countered everything we've seen him do previously. Yeah, like I said, it wasn't a bad match. I don't really think I needed to see Kendall put George South in a hammerlock for 20 minutes. At one point, they went to a crowd shot, and you could clearly see a lady dozing off in the second row. But aside from that, Kendall was very, very dominant throughout the match. And he won with a bulldog out of the corner. Hey, so far it was the best match in the entire show this week. That should immediately raise some eyebrows right there. Kendall Windham was in one of the better wrestling matches on the TBS Superstation. Well, yeah, kinda. I mean, it was better than Eddie Gilbert versus Agent Steel. To think, 1 week after Eddie was part of that huge tag team main event, working with the top two heels in the company and standing his ground with them, this week he goes out there and wrestles Agent Steel. And the match was so generic and so uneventful. Tony and JR spent most of the match plugging Chi-Town Rumble t-shirts for merch sale plugs. Honestly, they weren't missing out on much. They wrestled. It was mainly boring. And then Eddie won with a stun gun. It's literally all I got out of it. And since we're now back with the post-Crockett formatting on the TBS Superstation shows, where promos and interviews are very scarce and not heavily prioritized, well, we dive right into the next match. Dr. Death and Mike Rotunda versus Mike Jackson and Trent Knight. I liked at the very beginning of the match, Kevin Sullivan goes over to the interview podium to get JR and Tony to put over who the best athletes and the most imposing forces are in the NWA right now. Obviously referring to Rotunda and Williams. And then he goes, and JR, would you say that I'm the most devious man on this earth next to yourself? JR just goes, I'd agree with both those statements. Yes. If you listen closely on the audio, you could hear Tony Schiavone audibly laughing in the background. They also got into the topic of mobs at one point, which JR then sells out Schiavone by going, "Oh, he's Italian. He would know all about that." I love JR. So, well, while the match is going on, they're still talking about the Road Warriors, trying to hype that feud up. At one point, they just randomly brought up Abdullah's name. No idea how the fuck they got on that topic. Apparently, there was a six-man they were promoting that involved Abdullah teaming with Hawk and Animal. That sounds atrocious. I'd have loved to have seen that fucking fiasco in person. But that was the main selling point for the segment. Varsity Club beat up on Jackson and Knight for a while. Williams got in there at the end and gave Knight a few big press slams and then put him away with a stampede. So just to clear the air here, the Road Warriors are babyfaces again, right? Did they ever explain that? Obviously, we remember how they turned heel at the end of last year. If they ever bothered to explain how they just became babyfaces again off camera, or if they just quietly did it hoping nobody would ask questions, whatever the case, I have to presume the Road Warriors are back to being good guys now. I mean, it makes about as much sense as turning them heel in the first place. And that brings us to Ricky Steamboat versus the Russian Assassin number 2. Better known as the match that was taking place in the background while the attention was all centered on Ric Flair. Now, this was the highlight of the show. Everything that took place in this 10-minute window. You know, it's just one of those great classic wrestling tales where you got the deranged heel being all catawampus and out of control. Flair comes out there and starts yelling at Jim Ross and Tony Schiavone about how last week was a fluke, how he wants that win stricken from the record books and how it never happened. Meanwhile, Steamboat's just having a match. Flair's out on the floor yelling at fans, pacing back and forth to the podium, literally having a conniption on live television and drawing attention to himself. Steamboat does not give a fuck. And this is all like pre-Nitro crazy Ric Flair we're getting here. He was just incapable of accepting the fact that he got pinned by Steamboat. Now he's just lost his ever-loving mind. And the longer the match goes on, the angrier and more bent out of shape Flair's getting, having to watch Steamboat dominate the match and not even break a sweat in doing so. Not trying to discount what the Russian Assassins were doing here. I do find it funny that the Assassins are essentially just regular standard job guys. Still paying Paul Jones to be the most useless manager of all time. And so after Steamboat goes over with a flying crossbody, he takes out all the Assassins by himself, including Paul Jones, at which point you see Flair on the floor goading Steamboat into fighting him. And at first, Steamboat is totally ignorant to Flair trying to get his attention. But finally, Steamboat charges and leaps over the top rope onto Flair. And while they're on the floor brawling, here comes Barry Windham to try to give the heels a numbers advantage. But then Eddie Gilbert runs out to even the odds. And it's a big chaotic scene for a few minutes as we see Gilbert getting driven into the ring post face first. Flair and Windham pin him down in the concrete, so that way Flair can give him the big knee drop and then smash his head into the ground. And, well, then Steamboat fires back and helps to send the heels packing. We also caught a brief glimpse of Flair's torn slacks. It was a good little heat angle. And again, I love what they're doing with Flair. He's gone from calm, cool, and collected to utterly delusional. And it really is a great contrast when you think about the Steamboat-Flair dynamics. Steamboat is about as reserved as anybody could possibly imagine. And when you pair that with Flair, who's on the complete other end of the extreme, this crazy loon-bad heel, God, the story is impeccable. I mean, the whole idea is they're selling you on the fact that Steamboat is living rent-free inside Flair's head. All he had to do was pin him one time in a non-title match. That's all it took to send Flair over the edge. And it was the perfect kind of babyface to do that with. Yeah, I just think, like, if they'd have tried this story with a Sting or a Lex Luger, I don't think it would have worked. I think the flavor of personalities was way too different. I mean, Ricky Steamboat was the kind of level-headed babyface that made crazy Ric Flair work. It is so great when you think about the fact that this all predates Steamboat actually winning the fucking belt. Flair is still the champion. And he's still completely incapable of getting over the fact that he was pinned by Steamboat. Because Flair knows the truth. You could actually lose that title to Ricky. He's lost his confidence. So then we come back for the top of hour 2 as they gloss over the Eddie Gilbert situation. And then we pitch to the ring for Dick Murdoch versus Mike Justice. I'm not entirely convinced the crowd didn't take a nap while this match was going on. It was eerily silent. In their defense, it was a hideously boring fucking match. Tony and JR may have mentioned like one or two things that Murdoch did. The rest of the time, they were either talking about Flair versus Steamboat, or they were talking about the Chi-Town Rumble and other live events. I wrote pretty much nothing down. It sucked. Dickie went over. Lex Luger versus Jerry Price. God, I have like nothing to say about these fucking matches this week, dude. These weren't even so bad they're funny squash matches. They were just boring, forgettable ones. Even the boys were kind of wrestling like they didn't give a crap this week. There was a lockup sequence where Luger looked like he was sleepwalking through the collar and elbow tie-up. It was the weakest lockup I think I've ever seen executed. Now, of course, as is the case with every Luger match, the only thing that never matters is the finishing torture rack. I did laugh at one point, though. Tony and JR were bending over backwards to talk about what a truly wonderful and nice man Lex Luger is. I'm sitting there like, boy, if only you guys knew. That was so painfully designed to swerve the audience. Don't worry, fans. Lex Luger's a great guy. No reason to believe he'll ever be a bad guy again. So Luger hit a sloppy backbreaker, followed by a power slam, followed by the rack to get the win. By this stage, you could really tell how much momentum Luger's lost since the Starrcade fallout. He's just spinning his wheels. totally directionless. The announcers are like, well, he and Sting have talked about wanting to set their aspirations on tag gold, but, well, then again, maybe Luger wants to go after singles gold, too. Just fishing around for ideas. Yeah, luckily they figured it out. All it took was for Barry Windham to leave the company for them to be like, oh shit. Now we need a new U.S. champion. How about that Luger guy? He's got nothing else going on at the moment. And then we had a moment here in January of '89 that I strongly underestimated when I look back at this period. If you're going to watch this episode for anything beyond the stuff with Flair and Steamboat, you have to listen to the reception that the Midnight Express got for their match with Rick Allen and Keith Steinborn. What a fucking pop. And I've been on record saying that I personally did not enjoy babyface Midnight Express like I did the heel Midnight Express. But these fucking people did. They might have gotten a bigger babyface pop than Ricky did looking back. So there was quite a bit of activity going on during this match. Trying to spice it up a little to keep the Midnight's feud going. So while Bobby and Stan are working over the job guys, you see Randy Rose, Dennis Condrey, and Paulie start making their way out from behind the curtain. And they're trying to lure JC's Midnights over to fight them. But Jim, Bobby, and Stan are not taking the bait because, well, apparently Turner made it clear to them that because of the fact that the last time they brawled on the studio show, they destroyed a bunch of camera equipment and cost the company thousands of dollars to replace all that stuff. If they got into another brawl in the Atlanta studios, they would all be suspended without pay. So, okay, kind of an interesting ploy to prevent these guys from touching before the Chi-Town Rumble. It may have gone better in execution if Jim could actually explain what was going on at the podium. But holy fuck, was he blown up. He was panting and wheezing through this whole promo. He's trying to talk about wanting to rid Paulie for the betterment of everybody because he's nothing but a disreputable runt. Meanwhile, he sounds like he's about to have a heart attack on the microphone. I know JC wasn't in the best physical shape here in 1989. But good Lord. How did he get blown up going back and forth to the ring? It was like a 10-foot walk. It's not like the ring was on the other side of the room. So the Midnights went over with a Vegematic. Surprisingly, despite all the smoke and mirrors, match wasn't too terrible. Keith Steinborn is appalling, but when he's being carried by Bobby and Stan, he's actually passable by comparison. Probably more of a reflection on the skills of Bobby and Stan, but hey, I put over Keith Steinborn. It'll probably never happen again. That led us to Rick Steiner versus Eddie Sweat. As Steiner came out wearing the TV title backwards, Tony Schiavone, not even batting an eyelash, just goes, well, it comes with the territory. You don't question Rick Steiner. It may be incorrect for anybody else to wear the belt backwards. Not Rick. That is perfectly acceptable. So this is every Steiner match you've ever seen. At the same time, he's having fun toying around with Sweat. He just throws him around the ring with the released German suplexes and other moves where the guy's visibly getting dropped on his head. The perfect combination of silliness and lethal severity. There was a brief moment where Eddie Sweat tried to give Rick a couple chops. I guarantee you that was the first time Eddie Sweat ever even attempted to do chops in his life. It was hilarious. He looked like a fucking Spurg from a backyard promotion. Anyway, Steiner talked to his hand very briefly and then subsequently beat Sweat with a belly-to-belly. So I guess Alex called the move. And going back to what I said a minute ago about not questioning the logic of Rick Steiner wearing his TV belt backwards, you know what else you don't try to question Rick on? Promos. Does he ever actually make a point? Does he ever finish a coherent thought? Most of the time, no. Does it matter? Fuck no. Because he's Rick Steiner. He doesn't have to be coherent or logical in his rambling promos. That defeats the whole purpose. He's just Rick Steiner. Tony tries to start like 3 different questions about 3 different guys. First, he mentions Mike Rotunda, to which Steiner immediately interrupts and goes, "You mean Retardo?" Then Tony mentions something about Commando Ray, which Steiner just goes, "That big blob." And as Tony tries to bring up Kevin Sullivan, Steiner calls him a toad. Every single time Tony cannot finish an actual question, at no point does he ever try to get back on track. He just moves on and says, "All right, Rick, never mind." So, well, Rick rubbed his dog's head. He talked with Alex for a little bit. This is where I wrote, show is completely off the rails, yet surprisingly, this is not the worst of what is to come in 1989. If you thought Rick Steiner talking to his own hand was the biggest concern for WCW in the coming months, oh, let me inform you, there was way worse stuff to come. So then the Road Warriors showed up and killed Randy Hogan and Bill Holiday. Another highlight of the program this week. Animal picking up Randy Hogan and then recklessly throwing him on top of Hawk's knee. Tony Schiavone nonchalantly goes, "Hey, new move." This may have been the longest recorded Road Warrior squash in history, meaning that it went approximately more than 45 seconds. This one got almost a full 90 seconds. God, that's a fucking Iron Man match by Road Warrior standards. So they went with the Doomsday, and then they were right back at the podium doing traditional babyface Road Warrior promos. They're no longer pissed off at the world for being undervalued and underappreciated. Now they're just back to being pissed off for the sake of being pissed off. They put over their hometown of Chicago, basically to help push the Chi-Town Rumble pay-per-view in February. Animal told the Varsity Club that they need to stop pretending to be afraid of them. And then Hawk was back to doing his goofy promos about detached retinas, deviated septums, internal hemorrhaging, and torn cartilage. Quote, "The things that dreams are built on JR was not amused. In fact, he was gravely concerned. All I know is that while Hawk was in the middle of talking, and this actually wasn't the only time this came up on the show. This occurred in like 4 or 5 other segments. But while he's in the middle of his promo, in the background, you could hear these digital tonal sounds. I don't even really know how to describe it. It sounded like a synthesizer playing different pitches on a keyboard, but it was obviously something going on in the production room. But I'm sitting there like, what the hell are those sounds? And why am I hearing it all over this God-blessed program? So annoying. This is the show where it really hit me. Production with WCW is rapidly falling off a cliff. It is painfully obvious that Turner bringing in his own camera crew to film these shows, nobody knows what the hell is going on. You had weird sounds happening in the background, other camera guys walking right into shots. It's like everything people used to poon about the dying days of WCW from like 1998 to 2001. Constant production gaffes and amateur level camera work. I guess some things never change. And then I swear to God, not making this up, they had about 9 minutes left in airtime. Actually, even less than that. It was more like 5. When they come back from commercial, they tried to give me a match of Ivan Koloff versus Gene Miller. I paused the show, took a deep breath, contemplated my life momentarily, and thought about the wonderful possibilities of what I could reasonably do with 5 minutes of my life if I don't subject myself to watching Ivan Koloff versus Gene Miller. So I said, fuck this. And I skipped ahead 1 minute. That is precisely how long it took for Ivan to beat Gene Miller. To which I asked, okay, why book the fucking match to begin with? I don't know. All I know is they spent the last few minutes recapping the big angle from earlier with the Horsemen, Steamboat, and Gilbert. And they brought Steamboat back out to talk about the conditioning of Gilbert. And this right here, this moment just encapsulates everything about this show in a nutshell. Steamboat goes, ladies and gentlemen, Eddie Gilbert is suffering from a broken nose, a possible concussion. There is a brief pause, and you hear one person in the studio go, "Oh, right, yeah." Okay, first off, yes, that was absolutely hysterical. I don't care what anybody says. With that said, it totally killed the promo. Steamboat's trying to do this fiery babyface promo on the Horsemen, putting over the fact that Gilbert took a bullet to save him tonight and that Steamboat owes him one. And meanwhile, people are just in the crowd actively cheering for the heels, beating up the babyfaces. This is where you could see that radical shift in wrestling fan psychology, where the heels started becoming more likable and cool. The babyfaces were just run-of-the-mill bland personalities that nobody liked or cared about. It's not to say that was universal, but you could tell that nobody gave a shit about Eddie Gilbert. And that's sad. I mean, God bless Steamboat for trying here, but once people cheered for Eddie getting his face smashed into the concrete earlier, it was all downhill from there, brother. Concussion, broken nose. Yeah, that shit's funny. Let's all applaud it. The only thing I could just think is, this is a very long show. And outside the stuff with Flair and Steamboat, there's really not a whole lot hooking my attention right now. The Midnight's feud is kind of dead in the water. And that's before knowing that we never really got a suitable payoff for that at the Chi-Town Rumble. Varsity Club versus the Road Warriors is whatever. You know, Rick Steiner's just kind of twisting in the wind right now as the TV champion, despite him still being massively over. And then there's guys like Luger and Sting. They are dudes that exist. They don't have jack shit going on right now in terms of programs. This show's kind of a hot mess. They had a good series of shows going at the beginning of the month, but I think a lot of that was due to the hype of Ricky Steamboat coming in. And they were riding the wave of momentum after Starrcade. But I'm just looking at the timeline right now. Even before we get to the Chi-Town Rumble, there's supposed to be another Clash event coming up in early February. I have not heard them mention that one time on television. And I need to be careful not to miss that, because I've already done that with one of the Clashes last year. And I know the Clash events are about to become significantly devalued, but I do want to at least try to recap the majority of them. But the fact that they haven't even mentioned the Clash 6 or even started promoting a card for it, that's kind of odd. Well, what do you know? That clever thinker Grizzly Smith, he got him. Just when Jim Cornette thought he was going to pull a fast one on the Midsouth team, they were one step ahead of him the entire way. So here's the latest scoop on the Midnight Express versus Magnum TA Wrestling 2 saga. In the last week, JC had signed a contract for a match between both teams. The only problem was that Corny didn't read the fine print before he signed. He failed to note that the match was non-title. And since there was no way to renegotiate a deal by that point, well, the Midnights were kind of stuck. Now, of course, that didn't mean Cornette wasn't going to look for any excuse to keep calling Magnum and 2 cowards. He's trying to justify it by saying that it's all a conspiracy because the champions are still too afraid to put their belts up. The company is protecting them. So what that means is that the Midnights are going to have to keep doing what they've been doing in order to make their point. They're going to keep humiliating the champions and show why they're nothing but yellow-belly dogs. It was great watching Bill Watts react to all this on the headset. He's just smiling the whole way through. Like, that dipshit Cornette. Getting all cocky and brash and then realizing that he fucked up by signing a non-title contract. What an idiot. So we go to the ring for the match, and immediately, as soon as they cut to the ring, and Boyd Pierce is standing there with that fucking hideously grotesque suit design, I instantly knew, oh, Cornette is going to have a field day with this one. So, of course, he takes the mic from Boyd, and he goes, "What happened, Boyd? Dress in the dark again?" I was expecting him to be much harsher. I know I usually ignore the Boyd outfits because they're always ridiculously over the top. Even this one, I couldn't help but think, where and how does somebody come up with a suit design like that? Indigo jacket and matching pants with giant rectangular patterns. It's either drugs or they knew the circus was coming back in town that weekend. And that wasn't even the best part of Boyd's ring intros. This is how he introduced Magnum TA and Wrestling 2. As they're making a beeline to the ring, ready to throw soup bones with Bobby and Dennis, they immediately get in there and start brawling. Boyd just goes, "And in the ring, and I'm leaving." That was the single best part of the show. I laughed so hard at that. "And in the ring, and I'm leaving." Because even Boyd knew, yeah, fuck this. I am risking my life for this. And this could not have been laid out any better as a match. We knew the level of animosity going in. This wasn't going to be a professional grappling contest. This was going to be a frickin' brawl. Title or no title. Magnum and 2 made it clear the other week when they said, "We don't give a damn. We just want to get our hands on the Midnight Express." God, this match was so awesome. It was so great. I never even thought about the belts being on the line one time during this match. Everything they did here, from the hot open when the babyfaces run in and start cooking with a big flurry of offense, they're just having their way with Bobby and Dennis early on, beating them from pillar to post. You get the eventual spot where Wrestling 2 gets kneed in the spine when Joel Watts wasn't paying attention. And then from there, it's a great heat sequence where Magnum's on the apron trying to fire up and rally the people behind 2 as he sells for a while. Of course, Bobby and Dennis's double team work is always flawless. And then you get the big Magnum hot tag. He gets to run wild for a bit. But right as he's in the middle of his comeback, JC pulls down the top rope so that Magnum spills out to the floor. And that opens the door for the heels to start double teaming Wrestling 2 as Cornette hands a leather belt off to Bobby. And this part, I'll admit, was kind of weird at first. Okay, they're trying to pin down Wrestling 2 so Bobby could start unloading the belt shots on his back. But you see 2 kind of hesitant at first, being a little uncooperative. Like he wasn't really down to be taking those belt shots. Bobby gives him a couple whips, and then 2 tries to no-sell it and make his own comeback. I was like, what in the fuck is going on? Is Wrestling 2 going into business for himself here? But no, they do eventually get him pinned down long enough so they could give him a couple more belt shots. And then they do the same to Magnum, which led to the highlight of the whole segment, is they feed JC the belt so he can get in a few shots of his own. And Bill Watts is there shouting, "How degrading. The biggest insult to have that little pipsqueak mama's boy sissy put the belt to Magnum." Like, between that comment and JC making fun of Boyd's outfit, I couldn't decide which one I found funnier. I still think it was Watts reacting to Cornette whipping Magnum with the belt. Just because of the fact that he had to get in the fucking line about JC being a sissy. It's like he was trying to rattle off every debasing slur in the book just to get over how much of a worm JC was. In 2025, I don't even know how many people use the word sissy anymore. It's kind of an outdated term. But if you actually look that word up and what it traditionally stood for, makes you laugh even more when you hear Watts comparing one to Cornette. So, well, then Wrestling 2 managed to come back with a couple chairs to send the heels fleeing for safety. It was a great fucking shot as you see Wrestling 2 hurl one of the chairs towards Bobby. Chair hits him right in the side of the arm. I was like, that had to have sucked. And the people popped for it too. They were like, hell yeah. I hope it's broken. I loved everything about this segment. I also love the follow-up promo with Magnum and Wrestling 2 at ringside. As they're showing the welts and the damage caused by the belt shots earlier. You know, obviously these guys are pissed off. And, well, Magnum's promo was relatively generic. But Wrestling 2's promo, that was something else. And Lord knows that I'd ever consider Mr. Wrestling 2 a lightning rod promo. But they lit a fire under his ass on this taping. 2 had some stuff to get off his chest. He goes, "Get a good look. Yeah, you got me. But everyone knows about a man that used to be in the territory called Carl Krupp. And he tried to do the same thing to me that the Midnights did. So what did I do? I took the belt and I peeled his back with it until he bled. And the Midnights will feel the same pain." Now, obviously, I can't do the passion justice by simply recapping the dialogue. But, yeah, that Wrestling 2 was full of piss and vinegar here, brother. Something tells me there was some real pent-up passion coming out of that promo. All I could think after it was over was, worked belt shots or not, I don't think I would want to be in Bobby or Dennis's shoes. Having to potentially get back in the ring with that raging old lunatic? No thanks. I'll just lay down and eat the pin. So from there, we come back for Hacksaw Butch Reed versus Mike Starbuck. On top of hearing Bill Watts refer to Cornette as a sissy, you know what I was not expecting Bill Watts to call Butch Reed? A bugger. I heard that and I was like, you know the guy's not a dog, right? When the hell have you heard a human being be referred to as a bugger? Maybe in the South. Who knows? So this is basically a one-sided onslaught. There were several moments in this 30-second squash where I legitimately thought Reed was trying to kill Mike Starbuck. He threw him around the ring for a little bit, hit him with a flying shoulder tackle for the 3. Sucks to be Mike Starbuck. He was brutally destroyed here. It did hit me too, as we came back from break for this Jim Neidhart versus Mickey Henry match. So, Neidhart and Reed broke up as a tag team in late December, kind of out of the blue. They were the Midsouth Tag Team Champions at the time. Ever since that breakup, they really have not done jack shit on TV, have they? They're just working occasional squash matches. Not really doing a whole lot beyond that. Are they still feuding? I would presume so. We never really got a singles blow-off to their rivalry yet. Not that I'm clamoring to watch a Jim Neidhart singles match. That has never been a thought that has crossed my mind one time. I could barely get through this minute-long squash without wincing every time Neidhart nearly dropped Henry trying to get him up for big slams. He looked like he was about to give himself a hernia just going for a basic body slam. And I can't tell if that's because Henry was potentially sandbagging him or if Neidhart really was that clunky. Either is possible. But he won with a clothesline after essentially taking a back bump in the process. It kind of resembled the double down spot we typically see guys do where they both hit each other and then sell. They basically did that, except Neidhart just covered him and got the pin anyway. Yeah, 1984 Mid-South was not completely devoid of its issues. You still had Jim Neidhart wrestling every so often. And what you saw was what you got. That took us to Masayo Ito versus Joe Savoldi. For those that missed last week, Ito debuted in a match with Rick Rude, where he essentially applied an illegal spike hold on Rude, causing a ruptured throat. So this week, they basically did the same match layout with Ito working over Savoldi for a minute. And then at the finish, he slaps on the illegal claw hold, forcing a disqualification. Pretty much a carbon copy of the angle they did the other week, where you see Savoldi start going into convulsions and they got the giving blood trickling down his mouth while the officials are trying to break Ito's grip. You know, right now it's basically them trying to get over Ito as an out-of-control heel. You know, I mentioned the other week how it seems odd that he doesn't have a mouthpiece. Unfortunately, I don't remember anything about Masayo Ito's run in Mid-South or where it goes with the booking down the road. I had to assume they'll eventually bring Skandar Akbar back into the fold. Because right now there's not a whole lot going on aside from, hey, this guy's using an illegal chokehold. Boo. So we'll see where they go. And then we had a quick recap of the angle they shot last week with Terry Taylor and the Russians. Now remember, Taylor was originally scheduled to wrestle Nikolai Volkov, but they did a last-minute switcheroo, and they plugged Darso into that spot. So as Darso and Taylor are having their match, this is where Nikolai ran out with a hangman's rope, so the heels could double-team him and then drape him over the top rope by his neck. And it's been a very heated feud since Taylor showed up and knocked off Nikolai Volkov in his debut match. Ever since, the Russians have been targeting him and looking for any excuse to put him out for good. So far, they've been unsuccessful. The hangman's rope angle last week was the closest they've come. But they've already made Taylor one of the top babyfaces just by having him combat the Russians and get that upset win his first week in. And now it's just a matter of Taylor being able to find a partner to help take on Darso and Volkov together. Which led us to the tag match, with Nikolai Volkov and Crusher Darso taking on the team of Terry Taylor and Brian Adias. Not necessarily the tag partner I would have chosen, but hey, to each his own. The opening couple minutes of this segment were awesome. They went through that cycle where they kept playing the Soviet national anthem over the loudspeakers at the beginning for Volkov's TV matches. And that worked for a little bit as a means of getting heat on the Russians ahead of time. This week, they changed it up a little bit. They actually had Nikolai sing the Russian national anthem on the house mic. Well, I couldn't tell you how far they got into the actual song, but they had this great camera shot while the Russians are holding up the Soviet flag. From literally out of the void, you see Terry Taylor and Brian Diaz hit the ring while Volkov's in the middle of singing. They just hit him from behind and then try to get the jump start. It was the funniest visual seeing Taylor show up from literally out of fucking nowhere to thwart Nikolai's vocals. So, you look at a match like this on paper, your immediate assumption is to think, okay, clearly Brian Diaz is here to take the fall, right? Well, normally I think the answer would be yes. To tell you the truth, I really could not figure out what the hell they were trying to accomplish in this segment. Okay, let's address the first thing. So, apparently when they were siding this match, it was scheduled to be the Russians going up against Brian Diaz and Hacksaw Jim Duggan. But for whatever reason, Duggan wasn't there. So Taylor showed up as a substitution partner for Diaz. Okay. Little strange to totally dismiss Duggan, but to be continued. Well, anyway, they have a pretty decent tag match. There's nothing wrong with it. Taylor was good making his little fiery comeback at the finish after Diaz had sold for a while. And then we get this very strange DQ finish. All four guys are in the ring. And then, who should run in to interfere but Masayo Ito? He immediately goes after Diaz and puts the illegal claw hold on his throat. All the while, I'm sitting there screaming at my TV monitor because Terry's out on the floor brawling with the Russians. He's maybe 10 feet away as Ito's just sitting on top of a Diaz in this chokehold. At no point does Taylor just turn to look over at the ring to notice, hey, there's this giant, massive human being beating up my tag partner. He's just like, nah, I'm going to hang out here and beat up on the commies some more. And then finally some underneath guys and a couple of referees run out to help. And after Diaz had already been killed with a chokehold, well, now is the point where Taylor starts chasing after Ito. So, Terry Taylor's a shitty friend. That's what I got out of it. And again, what the hell did Masayo Ito have to do with any of this? Like, I can understand him just wanting to go out there and beat up a bunch of random baby faces. But to specifically target Brian fucking Diaz? This is not the kind of babyface that the Midsouth audience has a strong emotional attachment to. Now, if Ito were to go in there and immediately target Taylor, well, that would have made sense. But this whole thing was strangely booked. It's like they were trying to do a crossover with feuds, but they never did a really good job explaining how we got to Chapter 2 of Masayo Ito's involvement. Perhaps there's more to the story that they'll explain later on, but so far I'm kind of lost. I had no idea what was going on here. Then we had Buddy Landell versus Limpin' Lanny Poffo. I will never be able to refer to him as Limpin' Lanny ever again. after that Cornette comment a few weeks ago. He is now forever to be known as Limpin' Lanny Poffo. I also mentioned last week, 1984 Budrow is my favorite period to watch Nature Boy Buddy Landel. He's had his peaks and valleys during his career, but 1984 Midsouth, to me, that is top Buddy. He was motivated. He was in shape. He was in the prime of his career athletically. He just returned last week after sporting the bleached blonde hairdo. He's cranked up the flare mannerisms to about a 10. And as good as Landau looked here, I really have to credit Poffo for making him look like $1 million, because he bumped his ass off for Budrow, taking concrete falls and flying out to the floor on multiple occasions. Now, granted, you can debate whether he was doing that to get over Landel or to get over himself, but I thought they had a really solid match. They worked a story of Landy getting stunned after having collided with the concrete earlier. So as Landel works him over and Poffo keeps trying to fight to stay alive, he had this crazy deal at the end where Landel slingshots Poffo over the top rope to the floor. Somehow Poffo manages to somersault and then basically land on his feet before taking the bump. And then Landel goes out, throws him back in, hits a corkscrew elbow, and gets the pinfall. Another good showcase for Buddy here. Obviously, they're still getting over his newer cocky heel persona, and he's knocking it out of the park. That's only after 2 showings. It's also before really getting him heavily involved in the top storylines. But as we'll see in the coming months, Buddy's going to quickly rise to the top of the card. The only other thing that happened this week was a replay of the Rock and Roll Express pre-tape they aired the other week. And I made the joke, if you weren't accustomed to already seeing that same video package, you were about to see it ram down your gullet. I would say the show overall peaked in the first 12 minutes with the Midnight Express Magnum and Wrestling 2 development. Everything else was mainly match focused this week. I still don't entirely know what they're going for with that Masayo Ito angle, but maybe it'll factor into the TV title tournament, because they're about to kickstart that next week. So we'll see. Again, not a blowaway show, but after the last several weeks, it was going to be hard to ride that wave of momentum forever. So, it's been a while since we've really talked about the idea of hot-shotting. It's an industry-wide term that usually indicates when a promoter or a booker gives the audience a big main event caliber match or some type of huge blow-off with very little to no fanfare. And I'm not saying that's exactly what they did here with World Class this week. But when Bill Mercer opened the show and he says, now we're going to take you to the highlights of Gino Hernandez versus Chris Adams and their big blow-off at Fort Worth, I was like, okay, hold on, what? We literally just saw the official breakup of that tag team 1 week ago. How the hell did we get them already having their grudge match? And not just that, but a supposed grudge match with a completely random hair stipulation that they set up moments before the bell rang. Now, I don't want to get too far ahead of myself with the way the finish went down. You can't necessarily call it the official blow-off because it was a heat finish that ended by disqualification. But I totally was not expecting them to just immediately start this week's program with Bill Mercer going, and now to look at the highlights of Chris Adams and Gino Hernandez in their big showdown. With that said, we got a partial match between Chris and Gino here in Fort Worth. Chris agreed to the hair stipulation beforehand because reasons. A stipulation match that I don't believe Chris needed to agree to since the match was already signed. But sure. And so they do their match. It's pretty good, although on the short side. Didn't really have time to simmer before they just went to their heat finish. At which point, you see Gino go out to the floor and grab his bottle of hair cream. And when he turns around after opening the lid, he throws it into Chris's eyes, allegedly blinding him in the process. I personally have never had the misfortune of having hair cream splash into my eyes. Apparently it is very acidic and or poisonous, because Chris is rolling around and covering up like somebody had thrown rubbing alcohol into his face. Again, hard to claim this would have been the end of their feud. It's oddly peculiar how quickly they just rush right into the first match. But it was good for what it was designed to do. Mark Lawrence is the worst fucking commentator in the history of mankind. But I also have a very easy time blocking out bad announcing. I did it for 3 years watching AEW. But that is currently where we're at with the Gino-Chris feud. And in about 2 or 3 weeks' time, that feud is about to be cut off at the knees. Which brings us back to the Sportatorium for the opener. Rick Rude versus Tommy Montana. We also had a pre-match promo from Rude and Percy Pringle where they basically talked about how Rude has defended the American heavyweight title against all comers. But Mercer is claiming that they've been intentionally ducking the Von Erichs. But Percy denies it. He says if any of them have the guts to sign their names on the dotted line, Rude will take care of all 3 of them individually. 3 of them. I guess Mike is being disregarded from the conversation. Goes without saying, Percy is usually the highlight of all these Pringle Dynasty segments. Not to undermine Rick Rude, but Percy's just so over the top and campy. The only thing Rude does to get heat on himself is flex his biceps and or show off his 8-pack abs. Which is fine, but Percy's more effective at yelling at the fans and trying to be a thorn in everybody's side. There's absolutely nothing to say about the match other than Rude going over with a DDT. But at least they establish a story. Is Rude intentionally avoiding the Von Erichs? Is he afraid to defend the belt against any one of them? Be it Kerry, Lance, or Kevin? To be continued. That took us to John Tatum versus the Missing Link. It took me approximately 5 seconds to officially turn on this segment. The second we come back from break, and I see Missy Hyatt and John Tatum in the ring together, I said, God damn it, no. We have literally seen these two break up and get back together 47 times in the last month. I even made a comment the other week. If these two are back together on the following show, I am going to boycott every Missy Hyatt John Tatum segment from here on out. Now, at the time, I was joking. Now I'm starting to rethink that. It really is a high school relationship drama in real time. There's always that one couple that constantly gets back together and then breaks up over and over and over again. To where you're just like, at what point do you just accept the fact that it's not going to work out? These are two grown adults. Oh no, but this time, it's different. Because Tatum made a promise to Missy beforehand. He told her that he'll never lose another match again. The same woman that has verbally and physically abused him after the last 17 matches in a row that he's lost. Tatum is so desperate to hang on to Missy. The only possible way to stay on her good side is by not losing another match. Well, there's potential for that story to work out if you completely overlook the fact that John Tatum has no balls. I will admit, it's more intriguing than the on-screen relationship they built up with Sunshine managing the missing link. Aside from a couple spots where Missy and Sunshine got into it on the floor, the turning point is when Link grabs Missy by the hair and attempts to pull her into the ring, but then Tatum sneaks up from behind and schoolboys Link for the 3. And of course, the humor afterwards is him boasting about the fact that he beat the missing Link, as if he did it on his own. I'm willing to let them drag me a bit further with this Tatum Hyatt drama, but if the end result is John Tatum losing his very next match on television and then gets smacked around by Missy again, I think I might throw a brick through my computer. And then we had our TV main event. Making his return back to the Dallas area, it is Terry Gordy taking on Kerry Von Erich. The long-lasting Freebird versus Von Erich feud continuing here in 1986. Now, this is obviously right after the Freebirds reclaimed the six-man titles. Then they left the territory once again. We're yet to actually see that footage, by the way. Just wanted to throw that out there. And obviously, when it comes to anything Freebird versus Von Erich related, we've seen just about every combination of singles and tag belts at least 100 times over by now. Gordy versus Kerry. I'm sure we've reviewed a dozen matches they've had together in just the last 2 years. I thought it was fine. Probably would have been a much different match if they'd have plugged Kevin into that spot instead of Kerry. But they were going for the powerhouse versus powerhouse combo. I mean, nothing really stood out in terms of big notable spots. I did like the moment in the match where David Manning yelled for both guys in the corner to watch the fist. Bill Mercer just comments with, both men fisting in the corner right now. Don't you just love taking shit out of context? The ending also came out of nowhere, as Kerry does a sunset flip over Terry and then pins his shoulders down. And they lead right into the afterbirth where Gordy tries to attack Kerry and put the Oriental spike on him. But then Kerry fights back and gets the claw on Gordy. And then Gordy just kind of vanishes. And while Kerry's on the floor getting ready to head to the locker room, out come Hayes and Roberts to try to pick a fight with Kerry. And they milk that altercation for several minutes as Kerry's just waiting around trying to pick his spot. The heels are in the ring waiting to pounce. And then who should run down to even the odds but Lance? So then Hayes and Roberts powder and say, nah, that doesn't work for us, brother. 2-on-2. It's not how we play. To tell you the truth, I have no idea why they needed to waste 6 minutes just to get to that end spot. I also probably would have preferred seeing Kevin run out to help carry, but hey, they got to get over Lance as best they can. The Pops are becoming more and more quiet. Noticeably quiet. I'm thinking a lot of the Dallas faithful are starting to catch on to the reality that, hey, this Lance Von Erich fella, he ain't real blood. And or the fans are already sick of him being forced down their throat. This really was one of those shows where, even though stuff happened, I just found myself largely bored through a lot of the program. You know, the Gino Chris Tate match from Fort Worth, again, oddly rushed and very hastily booked. Like I don't know if they just figured, well, we shot the breakup angle the week prior. We also shot the heat angle with Gino running Chris into the ring post. Probably not a whole lot else we can do in terms of milking that first match, so let's just do it. And again, they did not give us a clean finish, so presumably their idea was to continue the feud. Although, because of what's about to happen to Gino in the next week or two, it's not going to pan out as they planned. You know, as far as the rest of the show, just more of the stuff we've been talking about for the last month. I really don't care all that much about the Missing Link Sunshine pairing. The Missy Hyatt John Tatum thing is starting to wear out on me. I'm kind of sick of seeing those two. And I understand the bigger picture is the Sunshine Missy feud more than anything. But even that's starting to get a little dry. This is just a weird taping block. I mean, remove the pre-tape with Gino and Chris. The actual footage for the Sportatorium was like just a middle-of-the-road show where they didn't really move anything forward. It was just more of the same. We can always hope for better next time. I'm always hoping for better as I'm recovering from the sinus infection. This just sucks, dude. It's bad. The recovery is just not happening. And I'm taking antibiotics now, so I think I just have to keep my fingers crossed that this clears up in the next couple weeks, because, I mean, I know people really don't want to listen to me stuffed up like this, but it's also affecting my recording, because, I mean, you're not going to hear it in the editing, but there are parts where I have to pause the video just to clean myself up a little bit and get my congestion out of the way. Also, as I just can't talk. I'm trying. I'm going to shoot to try to do the Retro Raw and the Royal Rumble review on Monday. The problem is I have to record that stuff on Sunday. And it's already Friday. I can hope things get better in a 48-hour period, but no promises. And if this is going to happen for another week, I just might cancel next week's Friday show and give myself a little time to recover. Because again, this is just not even fun for viewers to listen to at this point, if you're even making it this far in the video. So, I'm going to wrap it up on that note. Take care, everybody. And I'll try to do a Monday show. We got the Royal Rumble, so I want to at least get that review out of the way. But I don't know how good it's going to be. I'll keep praying. But take care. Stay healthy. Peace out.